Hi Gordon. Today we're going to show you how to retrofit an air conditioning system from R12 to R134. We're going to do it on a 126, a 1983 126 body with a 300D turbo engine in it. But a lot of the procedure is consistent with any R12 air conditioning system. We just have to locate some of the components. So we've drawn a diagram up here, and I'll go through the basics of the diagram. The air conditioning systems on automobiles are generally like this. There's a compressor, and there are two ports on the compressor, a high and a low side. I've shown the arrows to be the direction of the refrigerant flow around the system. So the compressor pumps out refrigerant on the high side, and it sends it through a condenser, and the condenser then condenses that hot gas from the compressor back into a liquid. And then, still under high pressure, it goes through a dryer accumulator, and still under high pressure it enters the evaporator. This is the piece that's inside the car, and I don't know what the schematic diagram for an expansion valve is, but the very first thing that happens is we go through an expansion valve, and the expansion valve converts that liquid into a gas, and of course it absorbs the heat in the evaporator, so it goes out of the evaporator under low pressure finally onto the suction side or low side of the compressor. If we're going to retrofit this thing, what we have to do is we have to flush the oil in the remnants of the old refrigerant out of the lines, the condenser, the evaporator. So all the hoses, the condenser plus the evaporator have to be what we call flushed. What we don't want to flush through is the expansion valve, the compressor, or the dryer accumulator. Those three components, we can't run flush through those. So we have to disconnect the compressor and drain the oil out of the compressor as best we can, but we don't want to put flush in the compressor. We want to disconnect the dryer accumulator and replace it. We can't use the old dryer accumulator, it's got oil in it, and we can't run flush through it. So we've got to replace this, and then we've got to disconnect the expansion valve so that we don't run flush through that. So we flush the evaporator, flush the hoses leading up to the expansion valve, and then just put it all back together. Flush this hose, of course flush this hose, flush all the hoses. So the very first thing you need to do is disconnect the compressor and let it be draining of oil while you're disconnecting these other lines. So let's go look at the tools that we'll need to do this job, and they're kind of elaborate. And then we'll get started disconnecting the compressor. So let's look at the tools. Okay, if we look at the tools we're going to need, the very first thing we need to do is to disconnect the compressor. So I just have a rack of 1/2-inch sockets with a ratchet wrench and some extensions. And then also, just because I don't know what I'll run into, I got my rack of 3/8 sockets plus a ratchet there. And then I just gathered up several wrenches, just open end wrenches, all the way from about 10 millimeter up to 19 millimeter. So I have those because some of the bolts may require that. And then I know for the expansion valve I need a 17, a 19, and a 22 millimeter. There are 3 different size nuts on that expansion valve that I have to disconnect. And just for good measure, I know there's one 10 millimeter bolt that holds that dryer in there, and I got a hammer and a screwdriver just to see what else I run into. I probably don't need those. Then we went and got an R134 retro kit. This one has some oil, about 8 ounces, 9 ounces of oil, which is about what we need for the entire system, because we're going to flush all the oil out and replace it with this oil, which is ester oil. And then we have some new terminals or caps to go on the existing R12 system so that it's never confused and someone can't mix the refrigerant. So we have to have new terminations on the service ports. And then this one happens to come with a charging hose, and it already has some refrigerant in this system. In this kit, as you can see, it's got 24 ounces of refrigerant. 24 ounces of refrigerant is almost about what we need. We need one more can in addition to that. It'll take about Oh, it'll take about 2.5 pounds of refrigerant, 2.5 to 3 pounds of refrigerant to fill the system. Then we got some ester oil. We're going to put that in the compressor. Just dump a little in there so that it doesn't start up dry when we start the system up. We've got a replacement dryer. As I said, we can't use the old dryer, so we've got to replace that dryer. And then in order to flush the system, once we get it all disconnected, we got some Flush and Clean, a quart of Flush and Clean. And we've got a little flushing device here. It requires that we have some air pressure for the compressor, at least 100 pounds of air pressure. But the essence of it is we put that Flush and Clean in here, into the top. It unscrews. So we put about a pint of this stuff in there at a time, and then put it under air pressure with that little cap. About 100 to 125 pounds. You can't exceed 150 on this little tank. And then it's just got a rubber tip on there so we can put it up against any of the hoses or connections and just blow some of this flush through there to flush the oil out. After we flush it all out and get it connected back up, we're going to have to pull a vacuum on the system before we put new Freon in it. So I just have a set of vacuum gauges. I'll use the R12 connections that are on there and a vacuum pump. Now, this is a component that you may not have, but you could rent a vacuum pump. They're available for rent, and they're kind of expensive to buy for one-time use. So if you don't have one, you could rent a vacuum pump. We need to let the system dry for at least 30 minutes and then pull a vacuum on it, and again pull a vacuum for about 30 minutes to get all of that, any of the residual flush, as much as we can, out of there. It evaporates very quickly though. And let me see, once we get it evacuated, after we get it all flushed out, of course, then we're going to charge it with oil and refrigerant, and hopefully everything will work out just great. So first thing we have to do is go pull the compressor, so let's do that first. We're going to need this rack of sockets and some open-end wrenches to pull that compressor off, so let's do that. I didn't mention in the beginning, we've got a system that's already flat. All the R12 is leaked out, and of course that's why we're replacing it with R134 so we can work on it. If yours already has R12 in it, you need to have it evacuated by a professional. You need to recover the R12. The R12 in this system is already gone from a leak. We just have to make sure it's all gone, so you need to go have it evacuated by a professional and recovered. Of course, it's against the law to vent R12 into the atmosphere, and we would never do that. Not intentionally, but this one is just leaked down, and that's typically the problem. First thing we need to do is unplug the wire, and I've already unplugged it. It's right on top right here, but you can see it's just a two-prong connector, and it's up there on the top of the compressor. So you unplug that, so that's down. And then there's a 15 millimeter bolt right here that needs to come off. Now that you got to make sure that system is flat. We don't want any refrigerant in this thing. So we've already got the refrigerant out of this one. So that's one of the first things we're going to do. So we need to take that off, and usually I can't get a socket in there. I have to do that with a box end wrench. Now that's going to come off as soon as we take a bolt off up there. I'll just leave that bolt in there. Now the others are 19 millimeters. Sometimes you can break those loose. There are 3 of them. One right here, and one that you can't see so well, but it's right up here on top where my finger is right there. And so what we want to do is break all 3 of those loose, and then usually a ratchet is a lot quicker once we break them loose to actually take them all the way out. But sometimes I use a socket, sometimes an open-end wrench to break those 3 loose, and a couple of them, that top one especially, might be easier from up on the top side. Now I've already broken this one loose. So I'm not going to be able to get that one with an open-end wrench unless I can get it there. Okay, so now I've got a 19 millimeter and a 3/8 drive, which is what the size is. And so if I just apply the 19 millimeter, so anyway, as soon as we get these three bolts, these three long bolts, plus this 15 millimeter, the compressor will drop right out of there. So you can see this is loose now. So that's just going to drop down. Now there are two oil seals, two O-ring seals that we're going to have to replace there. And so we're going to be careful that those seal correctly. And one of them just fell when we put this thing back together. I might leave this bottom one right here for the last one because I have to take this compressor off from underneath. So I'm going to go on the top, get that bolt. So you can see that this one is a little easier access from the top. I don't know if you can see that, Gordon, or not, but it's right under the fuel pump. Okay, so we're down to the last bolt. I left this one right here to the end so that it'll hold the compressor. I got the top one out, and so you can see that the compressor is essentially just hanging there. These are long bolts. There. Okay, so now once I back the bolt out, there's a spacer in here, just dropped on my head. You can see that the compressor comes off. And now that thing hopefully has got oil in it. Yeah, and we're going to have to drain the oil. We want to get as much out. That's why we started here. So we're going to take this outside and just turn it upside down and let it drain and drip for 30 minutes or so while we do the rest of the system. Now the expansion valve on a 126 body is located under the driver's kick panel, and we've taken that off. On a 123, it's located under the passenger's kick panel, so you'd have to take the other kick panel off, but it's the same expansion valve, and essentially just right under the kick panel. So let's see where it is and see what we need to get it off. It's right above the accelerator, and I've already applied a C-clamp to it. And the reason I apply a C-clamp is to hold it, because the only thing that holds it on there are the 4 pipe connections. So we've got to screw 4 connections off, 2 on the bottom, 2 on the top. And you can see them. They're up there, there, and there.
That wire's in the way,
though. Oh, I see. Okay.
That wire's smack dab in the way.
Anyway, it's a silver rectangular box, essentially, with 4 connections. It takes 3 wrenches. It takes a 17 millimeter, a 19 millimeter, and a 22. The big connections on the low side are a 22 millimeter top and bottom. The top one on the high side, the compression side, is a 19, and the bottom one is a 17. And we put a C-clamp on there, as I say, to hold it, because those can be really tight, those connections, and this analysis enables us to hold it while we loosen the connection. So we're going to take that off of there. We have to. Now, as it turned out, I just took one of my cheaper 19s. These 2 top ones can be in really, really tight positions, and I ground it down a little bit because those two on top are really, really in an awkward position, and sometimes one is in the way of the other. So you have to first of all get one loose and undone in order to do the other one. So that's what I've done. Once I get one of them off, then the other one will be a lot easier because I don't have to have it ground down. Now we've got the compressor off and we've got it draining, and we've got the expansion valve out, and the last thing we have to pull is the dryer. And then we can blow the lines out and the condenser and the evaporator, flush them. So we already pulled the wires, the wires off of these little terminals on the receiver dryer. On the 126, it's right up here under this corner, and it's a 19 millimeter. that are the connections, and these are the lines that we have to disconnect and blow out, and we're going to have to replace this dryer. So these are usually pretty straightforward in terms of getting them off. They're just real easy connections. On a 123, this dryer is located over on the passenger side in approximately this location under the fender well. So that's the way you would change it on a 123 body. So both components, the dryer and the expansion valve, are on the passenger side, and there's O-ring connections here. And then this is just a little 8mm sheet metal screw that holds that dryer in there. So we got to replace the dryer, but we got to get it off in order to flush the system out. Actually, there are two little 8mm. There's another one back there behind it. Okay, so once we get those two out, we just lift the dryer out of there. So that's the thing that's got oil in it, and we can't flush it out. We don't get flush in there, so we just replace it. Okay, now that we have the system disassembled, we're going to put some flush in our little flush tank here, and maybe put about 4 ounces. This is a quart. It's enough to start. And then put the lid on. And then we put it under some pressure. And maximum is 150 on this tank. And my compressor is set at about 100, and that's plenty. So let's go put 100 pounds of pressure on this little tank. I got my compressor set to about 100 pounds and thought I need to fill that up. It's just a regular air chuck. And then we're going to use that, all that oil out of that evaporator. So let's go. Okay, now I've got my tank, and I'm going to just use a plastic garbage bag, and you see the two connections. So what I'm going to do is just blow that through there. Let the garbage bag collect it. Next. Okay. Now you see it had some, this one had some dye in there, so it blew through there. Now just to make sure I got it good, I'm going to go do it one more time. Hi Gordon. This morning we're going to finish our retrofit from R12 to R134 on a 126D or a 126 300D. What we've already done, as you recall, is flush the whole system. We took the dryer out and we flushed the hoses in the condenser, and we flushed the evaporator by taking the expansion valve out. Now we're going to put a new expansion valve in there today, just because the other one may have been a little plugged up. And once we're to it, it's not that hard once we get to it to change it. Now on the dryer, there's a little sensor, that electrical sensor that we need to replace. Got a little O-ring, so we're going to start by replacing that. And it doesn't need to be very tight. I'll tighten it up with a pair of pliers in a minute. So we're going to replace the dryer. We've already replaced the compressor. Now recall, we couldn't flush the compressor with flush. We had to just drain the oil out very carefully. So we drained the oil out from the R12 system out of the compressor, but we don't want to flush it because that flush will damage the compressor eventually. And so we flushed the system out, and we blew all the hoses out, and we actually let them dry for a couple of days. So now we've come back. Now what we're going to need is to tighten the system up. So put the expansion valve in, we put the dryer in, we've already got the compressor on, and then we need a vacuum pump, and I'm going to use a standard set of gauges to pull a vacuum on the system. Once I get the system evacuated, I'm going to charge it. You notice that we bought a kit here, an R134 retrofit kit. It's got, it came with a couple of cans of Freon, R134, I'll say Freon, refrigerant I mean. And these cans have oil in them. So They come with enough oil to charge the system. It may take another half a can of refrigerant. Also, it comes with the proper fittings to go on both the low and high pressure side. We'll have to do that after we pull a vacuum on it with that set of gauges. And we'll also put a tag on there to indicate that we've changed it. Also, it comes with a charging hose. I'm going to use the sight glass on this to see when it's full. So let's get to first putting these two on there and then pulling a vacuum and charging the system up. Those are the things we have left to do. As you recall, the expansion valve is right above the accelerator on a 126, so it's right up here. I've started all four of them. I put new O-rings on it. I've started all four connections. It'll only go in there one way, so you can't get it backwards because of the size of the connections. So I've started it all, and I put a C-clamp on there, and that's what I use to hold it while I tighten it up. So now I've got them all started, and it's simply a matter of tightening those connections. Okay, now once we get that expansion valve tight, we put this dryer back in. There's nothing to it. It drops right in that hole, and then there's a couple of sheet metal screws, and we've got O-ring connections on these two. I've put new ones on there, and you see we just start that one. There's one on the back side. We've got a couple of electrical connections to make that will go either way. That one's not polarity sensitive, so that will switch, and then tighten up the sheet metal screws. Looks like an 8mm, and we'll be done. Then we'll evacuate. Okay, now I've got the system all sealed back up, and I'm going to use my vacuum pump and a set of gauges, and I'm actually going to evacuate it through the high side. The reason is because I've put this little connection on the low side, and as soon as I evacuate it, then I'm going to charge it up. So I want to make sure I don't charge through the high side. Of course, I've got to always charge through the low side. So I've got the connection, and now we need to evacuate the system for at least 30 minutes, preferably 45 to get really, because we've had that cleansing fluid through there, that flush. We need to make sure that it's good and dry. So we're going to let it run for a while. So I just got this high side valve open, and I'm just pulling a vacuum on the system and making sure that it'll hold the vacuum, doesn't have any leaks. And it's going to take us a little while. Okay, so finally we've got a vacuum, and I just close the valve on that gauge set, and you see it'll hold a vacuum. And I'm going to just leave that on there right now, that valve closed, and I'll read the high pressure as we're charging it just to see what it is. Now, this R134 comes with a little tap kit, and I've already put the special R134 service port on the low pressure side. So all we're going to do is let the vacuum suck the first part of it in there, shake this up real good because it's got refrigerant plus oil inside there. So we're going to charge an oil and refrigerant. And this just pops on. These are real cool. And then we'll tap the can and we turn it upside down, and of course as soon as we get the initial charge, then we're going to have to start the car up, run the compressor, and pull the rest of it in there. And of course you can hear it going in there. So the first part takes pretty quickly because there's a vacuum on the system. Move the thing quite leaked a little out there. Okay, now we're going to have to start the car up. Turn the compressor on and put 2 of these cans in there and maybe another half. So let me get the car started. We're down to our third can. I know you can't hear me over the engine, but it looks like it's going to take maybe 2.5 cans. What we're going to do is let the pressure on this little system go up to as high in the blue as we can get it. If it gets in the yellow, it's too much. You can see it's running about right Okay, we finished charging. We had a thermometer and it was running like 68 degrees. That was in a hot garage and we had the windows down so it wasn't recirculating the air. Hopefully on a day like today we can get about a 50-degree temperature differential between the air blowing in the car and outside. So if it's going to be 105 outside today when we test this car, we wouldn't expect to do any more than about 55, 58 degrees inside the car after it cooled down and was running for a while at regular engine speed. So that's it.